Good evening, and welcome to tonight's session, Adjusting Academic Priorities. My name is Mikki Harris, and I'm here with Mark Johnson, and we both are professors in Georgia. Mark is at the University of Georgia, and I'm at Morehouse College. We're here to talk about this shift in this year of 2020, what happened in March as professors, and what we want you to think about as professors who are in the audience, some scholars, some journalists, a whole group of people are here, but we're going to be talking about this academic space and what is taking place. So, twin pandemics hit our lives in 2020 as COVID-19 and racial injustice have shifted the ways that many of us live and learn. We teach online, also in hybrid, some are actually in person, and we work to build a sense of community in the learning spaces where we work, no matter where we're working. This discussion tonight discusses the holistic environment where faculty can approach a strengths-based perspective in engaging students, collaborating with faculty members, and also maintaining balance in our own lives as we value what we value as educators. So while we're here, when we are actually in person at a conference, the faculty members, a number bring students to the conference, and we're very busy with our students. And so discussion was had where we said we want a space where we can build our network, get to know one another. So I encourage those of you who are faculty members to put a message online so we see who you are, where you're affiliated, and we can connect and expand this network beyond our in-person sessions or even beyond tonight, but throughout the year. I want to make sure that people feel connected and don't feel as if they're working in isolation, because that oftentimes can be the case. There is a network of people throughout the conference, throughout this seminar, but also throughout this photojournalism world that you can tap into. So I'm going to be speaking. Mark is going to be speaking. I'm also going to be looking at the Q&A over to the side, so going to be DJing here tonight. But Mark is going to, after we do introductions, Mark is going to kick it off, and I may ask some questions of him while he's talking. I will share, and he may ask me some questions while we're talking, but we're going to open it up so the questions that you do put in the Q&A we'll be able to address in this session. So please, any response, reactions, questions you have, we really would enjoy seeing them. I'm going to start with introducing Mark. Mark Johnson is a journalism professor at the University of Georgia, where he teaches photojournalism, multimedia journalism, video journalism, and graphic design courses. He also serves as the college's chief technology officer. Many of us know Mark as a faculty member at the Poynter Institute, where he teaches pedagogy in ways that allow faculty members to reach student needs. When I first met Mark, it was actually after my first year of teaching at Morehouse, and I was teaching a new media class where anything that was non-print was in my course. And I asked Mark, how do I do this? How do I teach reporting and sourcing and also production, podcasting, photo, video, SEO? And, Mark was very calm and witty and helpful in that he said, you can't do it all in one course, but here's some resources. And what Mark is known as is that person that's able to give resources and share his research to students, to faculty members, not only at the University of Georgia, but those at Poynter and those who reach out to him or are in the network. So it's really a treat to be able to have him here tonight and be able to talk about the difference, like what's happened in this year, because we rely on Mark for that work that he does with the tutorials that he creates and the website that he constantly updates. But now there's some changes that have happened in 2020. So we want to hear about that. For those of you that don't know, Mark is a Syracuse grad. He studied photojournalism in undergrad and photography in grad school at the SI Newhouse School of Public Communication. His work as a photojournalist has been in the editorial space, where he's worked for the AP, AFP, Lawrence Eagle Tribune, Metro West Daily News. And he's also been a photo editor, where he worked at the Utica Observer Dispatch and was director of photography for School Sports Magazine and schoolsports.com. Mark is a four-time Sports Car Club of America Road Rally Divisional Champion. He has served in the SCCA's National Road Rally Board and is director of the SCCA's Atlanta Region Road Rally Program. And this enthusiasm that he has for motorsports and photojournalism gets channeled into some of the work he does with students, where he conducts workshops, orchestrates motorsports photojournalism workshops, also conducts workshops in rural Georgia, and also at the Georgia National Fair. So, Mark, I'm so glad you're here. I'm really excited for everyone to hear what you're going to be talking about, because you have the ability to talk about this approach to teaching in a time that requires all of us to shift in many ways. And so as people have questions of Mark, please put them in the Q&A. But Mark, I'd like for you to introduce, I would like for you to just start off with saying, what has worked well for you? What's gone well? What's gone right for you in this year of 2020 with this shift?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Mikki, for bringing me on board for this. It's a great honor. The Atlanta Photojournalism Seminar is near and dear to my heart. When I came to Georgia 15 years ago, first of all, I only expected to be at UGA for 1 year, and I knew nobody in the Southeast, except for a couple of photographers that I had hired when I was an editor for School Sports Magazine. And that first fall that I was here in 2005, I went to the seminar and just started meeting all of these photojournalists from around the state, as well as from around the Southeast. And they became this wonderful resource. So as we have built up the photojournalism program here over the last 15 years, an awful lot of that is due to a lot of the folks who I met at the seminar. And so I want to thank everybody on the board of the seminar for continuing the faith and continuing to build this great program. I bring students every year. They come back and afterwards we do a debrief, and they just rave about the people they meet in the hallways, the sessions that they get to see. It's just been this wonderful, wonderful resource. So yeah, you asked about wins, and it'd be really easy to say that the wins are few and far between. But there's been a couple of places where I think my students have really sort of embraced this challenge. I think all of us as photojournalism educators, as journalism educators, talk about the continually changing media landscape and how the environment that I came up in the 1980s and the 1990s just doesn't exist anymore. So the career paths are different. The way we work is different. The technology is different. The way we approach storytelling is different. The way we think about our audience is different. And this was a wonderful way to sort of get all of those ideas across to the students very, very quickly, because everything that we had ever talked about in the way that we do documentary work, of being close to people, getting to know them really well, spending time with them, all of these became safety hazards. And so we really had to start thinking about everything from both the methodology of how we approach storytelling to the way we handle it technically. My students did struggle with a lot of different things, but like you said, we want to talk about wins. So I think one of the first things I learned is that if we were going to be online, so as with everybody else in mid-March, we made a rapid pivot from being fully in person to fully online. And at the University of Georgia, we had a little bit of whiplash on a Thursday in mid-March, where at 12 noon, we were told we were coming back from spring break and everything was fine. And 4 hours later, we were told, nope, we're not coming back from spring break. We're going to take a week off, and then we're going to take 3 weeks off and then come back fully online. So we had a pretty good level of whiplash. Having done some online teaching and building modules over the years to sort of flipped classrooms, this wasn't a technological challenge for me, but I knew that the idea of listening to me prattle on for 3 hours a week on a recorded video lecture just wasn't going to work. So one of the first things I did is I started reaching out to alums of our program saying, hey, can you come in and spend 30 minutes with the students to talk about business practices? Can you spend 30 minutes talking about marketing? Can you spend 30 minutes talking about social media? And it was a wonderful way for me to reach out and start re-engaging my alumni base. You know, we've got 15 years worth of producing students that went through my classes. And at the University of Georgia, we've got, 30, 40, 50 years worth of photojournalism students, photojournalism graduates. And every single person that I reached out to said yes. And so we got really, really lucky in sort of building this community once again, because at the end of these sessions, after they do a short presentation, we do a Q&A with the students, and the students were constantly saying, hey, can I have can I have this person's email address? Can I have their phone number? I want to follow up with this. And it really helped connect the history of the program to the current students. This fall, one of the challenges that I was facing is, as you mentioned, we do workshops. We do one every semester. The spring is our Woodall Weekend Workshop. It's a 3-day immersive program. In the fall, for the last 7 years, we've done one at the Georgia National Fair, where the students think that they're going to get to have a fun day at the carnival. And then they realize we're going to be there for 16 hours. It's usually 95 degrees, and they're baking out in the mid-Georgia sun all day long. And they're, we've worked with Georgia Public Broadcasting and the Macon Telegraph to publish that work. And those workshops are important because that's when I bring in all of these coaches from around the country, and the students get to get feedback from somebody else on the program, on the work that they're doing. And we lost the spring workshop and we lost the fall workshop. So this fall, we took one of our stories, one of our assignments on the election, and I basically reached out to about a dozen of the coaches who were regulars. Some of them are alumni, some of them are photojournalists working in the Southeast, some of them are folks that we brought in from around the country and said, hey, would you do some online mentoring? Basically spend 2 or 3 hours over the next month working with these students. And the students struggled an awful lot with those election stories. Every student was assigned a race that they had to cover, so there were a couple of candidates that needed to go out and document and then find the issues they were talking about. We had a lot of candidates that either ghosted them and didn't respond at all. We had some candidates that said, I'm more than happy to talk to you on the phone, but I'm not actually campaigning. But then we had some that really were out there. But the coaches were wonderful in the way that they spent the time and kept giving me feedback. And at the end of it, most of the students ended up with a really, really strong package of some sort. We did end up with a situation where a couple of them, we were a week out from the deadline for this, and they hadn't been able to photograph anything or anyone. And so we pivoted and came up with a new assignment that we called Why I Vote. And each of them went out and found a bunch of first-time voters, folks who had been eligible to vote in previous elections, but registered just for the 2020 campaign. And we ended up with about a dozen and a half or 20 of these 30 to 45-second interviews and portraits of people talking about why it was important for them to vote for the first time in 2020. So I think those were sort of the two big ones, was engaging the alumni and keeping the mentoring that I think is so critical to our program. Up until a year ago, I was the only person here that was teaching photojournalism, aside from bringing in a couple of adjuncts whenever we had a budget to do so. A year ago, we added a second photojournalism faculty member. Kaiser Lowe joined us. We've got a doc student here now who's studying photojournalism, and Andrea Briscoe. So there's the three of us that are in the building, but it's still important for us to bring in all of these other voices. I think one of the other wins that's also been a big challenge has been keeping the students engaged, because they're not always sitting in the room. And the online sessions are not always something where they feel completely vested in the process sometimes. So we spent a lot of time at the beginning of every session, whether it was in person this semester or online last semester, just making sure that they were okay, and sort of doing this mental health check-in and asking them what they were experiencing, what were they seeing that was different, how are their friends and families reacting to what's going on, and just really sort of staying engaged that way, which I suspect
So
is
Mark, let me
similar to
ask.
what you've been doing. Yeah.
So yeah, I was going to ask you, are with those sessions or when you're getting just engaging students, do they just sign up? Do you make it mandatory, or is it really just when they need to talk?
So I'm hoping that the registrar and provost for the university aren't watching tonight. In my advanced classes, there was a mistake made in scheduling years before I got here that I've never fixed. So my classes are 3 credit hour classes, and my advanced class has 6 hours worth of classroom time booked a week. It's a holdover. It should really only be 3 hours, but it's been 6 hours since I came here, and I've never asked them to fix it because it gives me a lot of flexibility that, we can run for 3 hours in one day and go real short the next day. But with these online sessions this semester, I still have that 3-hour time block. So every class, the first question I ask is, how's everybody doing? And how's everybody around you doing? And that gives them this opportunity to talk. We joke about the photojournalism program being a real family here down in the photo cave, which is what we call our lab downstairs. And that's something that I think is really true, because there's nobody else in our program that's going through the same experience as the 20 kids that are in those advanced photojournalism classes every semester. And I often joke with them at the beginning of a semester, they can either bond with me or against me, and I don't care which of those two it is, as long as they bond. And for 15 years, they really have. They have I am told, a very robust GroupMe chat session. And in the past, they've created Facebook groups to mock me and then let me join the Facebook group at the end of the semester. But I think all of us, one of the things we really want to do is we want to build that community. And going back to what I said a couple of minutes ago about the Atlanta seminar, one of the great things about it is that it's that sense of community. And that sense of community, I think, is critical for us as faculty members to continue building in our classes. And the way we do that is we say we're not always teachers. Sometimes we're counselors. Sometimes we're just friends. Sometimes we're just that ear that they can bend for a little bit about whatever issues they're having. And they really like to complain about my colleagues, which I find very, very entertaining. So what's the
Yeah.
experience
Yes.
been like for you at Morehouse? I mean, what was your students' reaction in the spring?
Oh, for us, the first thing was, what do you have? What do you need? So just making
Mhm.
sure students had computers. So for my class, which where we do production, it was immediately, do you have a computer? Do you have Adobe? How do we get everything set up? And that was the very first week. The other classes I teach where they're not in production, I found a number of students that were working with their phone and did not have computers. And so that was something we had to work on for fall, was making sure they had what they needed so that we weren't halfway through the semester just trying to get them in class.
Mhm.
Um, but what I did find was there were a number of students that wanted one-on-one sessions. So it was just time to talk about projects, but the first 45 minutes of our discussion was about life. It wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily about the project. But what I found was trying to look at how do we incorporate projects and life together. In the past, I would say, okay, you cannot do a story on a relative. You can't do a story on a sorority sister or frat. That's off limits. You got to go to the stranger and get to know them. But in spring, I actually relaxed because I realized they had some really strong stories just telling their own and whoever was around them. And so that was really helpful to just do a shift, do an adjustment with respect to that.
Can I ask? I did the same thing with my classes in the spring, and to a slightly lesser extent, this fall.
Mhm.
One of the challenges that I faced that I'm still not sure I got right was sort of talking about those ethical boundaries. As with you, my students are not allowed to cover anyone that they know or any organizations that they have an association with, and that's a hard and fast rule. In the spring, when it wasn't safe for them to go out and cover anybody but the people they were living with, we had to sort of toss that one out. Did you find a good way to have that conversation with your students to say, this is a unique situation right now? And once we're clear of this, this is not going to be acceptable either in the industry or in later classes.
So the ethical discussion was about people producing, becoming producers, where the person that you're close with all of a sudden wants to have a say in what's going on. And so that was where the discussion was, especially for people who are doing stories on a parent or a grandparent, where I know my own experience trying to do stories on my parents, where they want to be my parent and say, no, you can't do that. I want to see that. And it just gets to the point where I say, okay, I'm not going to do that. But so we had those where you don't want to lose control, and the ethical decisions you make about having access, upfront access, but how do you do that in a way that is not intrusive? And so that's where it started. But then it led to a conversation about who's telling our stories, because network news isn't coming into their homes to share their stories. And what a number of students were going through were stories that are of value. When we're 20 years from now saying, oh, remember when? Their stories are ones that I would want to read, to look at, to engage, more so than what's on the news. And so that was also a big part of the conversation, was the value at this time in being able to tell stories of people who are close to us, or even our own stories. So that's where we were with that.
Yeah. For my students, I had a couple of them in the spring that really wrestled with this idea that they did not want to cover their own families because at some point in time, they took an ethics class or they heard it from all of my colleagues before they got to me that we don't do this, that this is completely unacceptable to photograph and document, people that you know too well. And so we
Yeah.
had a lot of conversations about sort of the uniqueness of the situation that we were in. And the students, they ended up producing some pretty interesting photo essays about their lives, and some of them were straight documentary work about changes in routines and the challenges of trying to get food safely and still maintain some semblance of sanity and faith. And one or two of them,
Mm-hmm.
came back to me and said, I can't document that. My family is not interested in that, but my personal experience, I want to try and do something with. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, the closeness to art photography that we ended up with on a couple of them made me a little nervous. But I think in the end, it was therapeutic for some of those students to be able to find ways to express what it was that they're feeling through their photography, which is something that in my journalism classes we don't do. It's very
Mm-hmm.
much about connecting the people we're documenting to the people we're documenting them for. And I never wanted anybody to know who I was when I was a photographer, and that's a little bit of the sense that my students come away from our program with as well. So
Yeah,
can I ask how
definitely.
you handled the can I ask how you handled some of the technology challenges? Because I think that's something that an awful
Yeah.
lot of us did have to wrestle with.
Well, luckily, Adobe did offer free licenses through the end
Mhm.
of June. So it was a matter of getting online with each student and making sure they had the access they needed because we have labs and they only work in our labs in our library. Most don't have the Adobe suite on their laptops. And so the first thing was luckily Adobe did that. And then there was student affairs that we were able to secure laptops for those students that just did not have them. And so that was a priority that was able to be handled in my class. I teach the one of maybe two production classes on campus. So there wasn't a high demand. And so that was able to be fulfilled. But it did lead me to thinking about technology requirements in the future for the program and how we're going to handle this moving forward because in this semester we've now had to pay for the Adobe licenses for students, and so now we're looking at moving forward, what do we do with respect to the technology. And then the other things, I did look at free stuff, so they're, you know, on using Adobe Spark for packaging your portfolio or your stories, just also looking at some of those free ones, or Filmic Pro, downloading the free version on your mobile phone if you don't have access to the gear and everything that you really want to have access to. So
Yeah.
I'm living and learning as I go through it, and I don't have answers for everything, but it's this adjustment and being able to be flexible with the adjustment, and also talking to students about the focus is the story. We can't put all of our focus and attention on this gear and these things. So how do we present the best stories with what we have? And that's where we've had to have the discussion. So
Yeah,
yeah.
we were a little lucky in that the Department of Journalism moved to a bring your own technology program about 4 or 5 years ago when we redid our curriculum. So all of our students were already required to have laptops and have the Adobe Suite installed and fully licensed, as well as having their own cameras for the students in the intro class. So were in some ways oddly prepared for this sort of a shift because for the Department of Journalism, we're not running computer labs anymore. It was something that we decided to sort of get out of the business of building 5 years ago. And we do have
Good.
a program in place that if we have a student who can't afford the technology, we'll loan it to them for the semester. And that became a little bit more of an issue in the fall semester than it was last spring, because I think we did have some students who were borrowing stuff and they weren't going to be able to do that for an entire semester. And again, Adobe's decision to grant anybody that had a site license free access for their students was wonderful. And there were a lot of us that were crossing our fingers that that was going to continue through the spring. But I can understand the Adobe position on not being able to do
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I've been looking at this, the queue, and we have a question from Robert Heller from the
Mhm.
University of Tennessee. And Robert wants to know, are there any assignments that you've had to throw out and how have you replaced those?
Uh, do you want to answer that one?
I feel like I threw so much out.
Yeah, yeah. I'd say, for the fall semester, I taught intro classes in our advanced photojournalism class, and Professor Lowe and Professor Briscoe, my colleagues here, all three of us were teaching sections of the intro class, and so we met, I don't know, 3, 4 times over the summer, socially distanced on my back porch to try and figure out how in the world do we teach introduction to photojournalism, when we're only going to have half the kids in class and we got to stay 6 feet apart from them and they can't get near people. And so we went through all of the assignments that we normally used and threw out probably half of them. And that some of them, it kind of broke my heart because they were so critical to them learning lots of different things, particularly some of the early assignments. But we also took it as an opportunity to rebuild a bunch of to build a bunch of new assignments. So for the first time ever, we had a picture editing assignment in my introductory class, because I know that out of the 60 students we have taking intro to photojournalism this semester, there's only 10 or 12 of them that are going to end up in the advanced class in the spring semester and next fall. But the rest of them are going to deal with images at some point in their careers, whether they're going to be hiring photographers or working with photographers or selecting images for a gallery. So what we did is we built a picture editing assignment around the elections. So they had to go find 15 images that they would use in a gallery and then sequence them and rewrite the cut lines. And so I broke my class up into 4 different groups and gave them basically 4 different audiences that they had to edit for. One group was editing for an audience here in Georgia, one was editing for an audience in Washington, D.C., one was a national audience, one was a more localized audience. So each of them had to go figure out what is it that that audience needs to see from election day. And that was part of the challenge, is that all the images needed to be made on November 3rd. So that ended up being a really great assignment where the students had to go look at hundreds and hundreds of images and figure out, okay, well, which of these are, I've only got 15 slots. Which of these images are going to help tell a story? The one that crushed us the most to give up is the second assignment we give our intro students. And it's called 36 Faces. And it's 36 headshots of people that they didn't know. So the students dread this one. There's stories that float around years before the kids even get into the intro photojournalism class about how much they hate this assignment. The first 12, they photograph at 55 millimeters, and they're just doing headshots. They're literally their mugshots. So they got a 55 millimeters from the top of the shoulders to just off their head. 4 of them they do in bright sun, 4 in shade, 4 indoors next to a window, so they get side lighting. The next 12, they have to do it between 30 and 35 millimeters. And then the next 12, they have to do it 18 millimeters. So they have to keep getting closer and closer and closer. And for every one of these people that they photograph, they have to get contact information and background information. So they're learning how their camera works. So they're practicing with focus and exposure. They're seeing the difference between focal lengths and how that affects distortion and compression. They're learning how to collect caption information. They're learning workflow. So there's like 27 different things that they learn in that one assignment. And we couldn't do it. We had to throw the entire thing out. So we replaced it with what we called a 3x3 assignment, where they were going to photograph a roommate or a family member and do one of each of the 9 types of photographs that we normally have in 36 Faces. And to give them a challenge on the caption, they had to ask 9 different questions about these folks' backgrounds and write that into the captions. Useful, but not anywhere near as strong as the previous assignment, because the last part of 36 Faces, and I'll give full credit to Andrea Briscoe, because she came up with this a couple of years ago when she was teaching the intro class. We used that as part of our diversity lesson. And what she did is, when the students came in, she had printed out a grid of 36 faces for each one and handed it back to them, and then gave them sort of all the ethnic breakdowns that you could have, how many, and had them count, how many white students do you have, how many African-American students, how many Hispanic students, how many, on down the line, and then calculate the percentage that you had there, and then gave them the university's breakdown to see how well they had reflected the university community, and talk about, so why are 35 of your 36 people white women? What does that say about who you're comfortable approaching or who you're not comfortable approaching? What's our responsibility? I mean, it was this great way that in week 3 or 4, we were talking about diversity in who it is that we choose to document in our communities. And Andrea's lesson on that is just absolutely phenomenal. And we couldn't do that one either. So,
Mm-hmm.
but we
Yeah.
we incorporated a couple of other things. We had to throw out some of our portrait assignments, but we decided to do a remote portrait assignment where they had to be on FaceTime with somebody and have them walk around their house and get them to pose and prop their phone up and be able to then do a screen capture. And the image quality wasn't very good, but it forced them to have these discussions about light and background. Um, and like I said, the technical quality was not great on these things. We still have some more challenges there. But the learning off of it was really, really interesting because they had to look at what they're seeing on the screen, explain what they're seeing on the screen to the person that's holding the phone someplace else, get them to make adjustments so that they could get a clean background and good light and a steady shot and all of these different things. So it forced them to start articulating the things that maybe they understood at an intellectual level, but not at a level that they could verbalize it yet. So I mean that assignment, terrible pictures, but great learning out of that one. So
Yeah, I found that when you mentioned the photo editing, that has been something that I don't spend a lot of time on in the semesters where we're in person. But this semester, students have done really well. We've looked at a number of protests over time.
mhm.
And, I try to bring in tons of photos and they have to actually create the story, and so they're analyzing not just the composition and lighting, but how do you make this a story? And
Mhm.
they were able to learn just the structure of a visual story through
Mhm.
that. And then some of them hadn't, these are students that were 3 years old when September 11th, 2001 hit. So a number of them they didn't know about anti-apartheid movements, and there were so many different protests that have taken place that they were just too young to even see the photos of. A number of them are the age that Trayvon Martin would have been currently, and so for them they were just preteens when he was first killed. And so photo editing has led to tremendous discussions on impact and even your role as the photographer of the value and responsibility with what you capture when you can point your camera in any direction. So yeah,
Right.
that's been really good for us.
I think one of the other things that it did was because they weren't working with their own images, they had that distance from it. And because they weren't in a situation
Mhm.
where they were trying to decide what to photograph and what to push out on social media right away, it forced them to be more contemplative and think about, okay, I'm going to open with this image that shows X. What's the next thing that the audience needs to see? And how do I
Mhm.
get them to that? Can I go from a photograph of somebody standing in line to a candidate behind a podium, or do I need to put something, a transitional set of images in between so that they can build that narrative arc and the flow from image to image to image? We also got the opportunity to talk about the idea that going to a high school football game and posting 75 photos in a gallery is not necessarily storytelling. That's revenue generation for your company. Um,
Yeah.
that's what you're going to have to do by the half. But the next day, you probably want to go back and figure out, okay, what are the 10 or 12 story images that truly tell the story of that particular game? And of course, when we talk about that with football, sometimes they say, well, what if I only have 12 images that are in focus? And then we know we have to have a completely different discussion about what they're doing on Friday nights. So, yeah.
So I have a question about students coming together. I teach at Morehouse now, but I used to teach at University of Mississippi. And a challenge I had as a professor was when we were in the classroom, um, there was just students uncomfortable sitting next to being in small groups with people who were different from them in any way. And so I used to have to assign small groups and or say, okay, I need you to sit here, you to sit here, just to get people to work together. And when we did usually when we did workshops and off campus, that was when people came together. But just in the day to
Mhm.
day classroom, I felt this forced effort. Um, and so I at Morehouse, it has shifted. Morehouse, I see, it's a historically Black college, but there's tremendous diversity in that, when it comes to intersectionality, we can there's so many intersections, and the students there, even if they're not in the same, you know, crew or circle, before the start of class, they're giving each other pound. There's this community effort, you know, of just talking before class starts, and then we launch class. So I've found that I've had to make sure I bring that sense of community online. But I imagine if I was teaching at University of Mississippi, I would be struggling to figure out how to bring students together. Um, you know, as hard as it was to do in person, but online. Do you find that as a challenge, or do you have any successes with that building of community?
You know, I it's really interesting. I go from teaching the intro students in the morning to teaching the advanced students in the afternoon. And the intro students, they don't necessarily know each other. They're not really sure where they fit in the class. And it takes a long time, even when we're in a fully in-person semester, for that class to kind of to gel. But one of the things that I do encourage the students to do is to go out when they can and work together. You know, to go do a photo walk downtown. And our NPPA student chapter for many years has, at the beginning of every semester, they come to me and they say, so when are the intro students going to be doing their nouns and verbs assignment, which is the first thing when we send them out, just to make 400 photographs of anything they want so that they can practice with their camera. Um, and the NPPA student chapter will send out a message to all the intro students saying, hey, meet us at the Arch, just sort of the separation between campus and downtown, at 5 o'clock on Tuesday, and we'll go walk around downtown and we'll help. And so that starts building this sense of community, this idea that their education is their education, but they're surrounded by lots of other students who are going through the same experience. And that starts
Mhm.
to build that sense of community. I think one of the things that I've spent more time doing this semester, and we talked about this a little bit already, is sort of that the opening of class. It's not, all right, let's launch right into this. It's, how are you doing? And, you know, we always talk about how do you interview somebody and how do you get folks to be comfortable with you being there with the camera. Well, instead of just talking about that, we're actually doing it in the classroom now. We're asking those questions. You know, sometimes they're a little silly. It's, you know, what was the best thing that you had to eat this week? What was the best piece of television, best thing you watched on television? The best documentary? What's the funniest thing that you saw happen on campus? You know, whatever it happens to be, just asking those questions and getting folks to start talking to each other in whatever
Yeah.
way that you can is really important. And if you ask my students, they'll let you know that I'm perfectly fine with them mocking me, and I mock myself from time to time. So if I can get them to laugh at me, I don't care. That's as long as they're
Yeah,
laughing, as long as they're engaged with the process. So um,
that's
when
good. That's good.
when I when I assigned the mentors for the election package, we came in and I sent an email out that introduced the students to their mentors. And one of the mentors is a Pulitzer Prize winner. And we came into class 2 days later, and I asked if everybody had, you know, reached out and made contact with their mentor. And one of the students said, "Why don't you like me?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Why in the world did you give me a Pulitzer Prize winner? I'm scared of her." And I was like, well, first of all, you should be scared of her because she's terrifying, but she's also a great photojournalist and editor, and you're going to learn a lot from her. Um, and he just kept going on and on about how afraid he was of her. So we got a good laugh out of that whole situation. So, um,
That's great.
yeah.
So we have a question from Martin Smith Rodden from Ball State University. Martin wants to know, have either of us been able to manage doing sports assignments?
Uh, sports was, yeah. Sports was a huge part of our fall advanced photojournalism class. And not only not only did we not get to do a sports assignment, 4 years ago, my colleague Vicky Michaelis and I took students to Rio de Janeiro to cover the Paralympic Games, and we were actually scheduled to take 13 students to Tokyo in August to cover the Paralympic Games, and we lost that opportunity for our students. Although our intention is to go next year, as long as they hold them in 2021. Um, some of our high schools continued doing sports, some of them didn't. Some of them were very restrictive about where we could go and where we couldn't go. and they didn't start the season until late September here in Georgia for most of the athletics. So I took out the sports assignment, and this goes back to a little bit about what assignments we kept and what assignments we had to change that Rob asked a little while ago. I built a syllabus fully knowing that half of it I was going to throw away by the midpoint of the semester, and that's about what I ended up throwing out. So I had a sports assignment that was in there. I modified it 2 or 3 times and realized it just wasn't going to work. So we switched it to a bodies in motion assignment. So they had to go out and find a dancer, or a whole bunch of them went to the skate park that we have here in town so that they could go out and practice this idea of timing and action photography and composition and moments. And what I'm going to do is, for my students that are coming back in the spring semester, there'll be a sports documentary project that'll be in the spring class. It wasn't
I
an
like
ideal
that.
situation. Some of our sports are indoor sports here in the fall, and we can't do those. So winter sports of basketball, volleyball, things like that, those are right out. I'm not going to take the chance of putting the students into those environment. But there's enough spring outdoor sports, and I feel relatively confident that those will happen. Um, but that's my solution for that. Do you have sports assignment in your classes?
It's crazy. I teach in what's called the journalism and sports program, and I don't have a sports assignment. So no, not with this semester. But usually, our students will go and cover a Hawks game, NASCAR,
Mhm.
um, but football, especially in season, and basketball. But we haven't discussed sports at all as it relates to the performance of sports. Um,
Yeah.
it's we've done some audio storytelling, so that's where I started because I wanted them to learn Adobe Audition, and I like starting the semester with that. So this semester we relied heavily on Audition and doing audio stories. So sports came into that, but not actually covering the action.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
we have a sports program here. I've got 3 colleagues: Vicky Michaelis, Welch Suggs, and Carlo Finlay, and they all teach in our sports certificate program. And they did manage to take some of their reporting students out, and we had talked for a long time about, can we take some students to the softball game or something like that. And when we looked at having 10 or 12 of the sports media students there, and then trying to add in another 8 or 10 photojournalism students, just it got to be a little nerve wracking. And I think the coaches would have gotten a little nervous if 20 college students showed up at a high school softball game on a Tuesday afternoon. Um, it wasn't a great solution with the bodies in motion, although the kids, they found some really interesting stuff to photograph, that did get that idea across. And, they put together some decent little packages out of it. So,
that's good.
yeah.
Could we shift? I want to talk a little bit about, projects and research and all the other things that they want us to do as faculty members. So for those of you who aren't faculty members, well, at Morehouse, teaching is one third, research and projects is another third, and service is the other third of our work. And so in times like this, it seems like teaching would take up 100% of your time, but we still have demands to be of service to the college through committee work and also do our own research and projects. So, Mark, you do a lot, and I don't know how you do it all, but could you talk a little bit about, how do you find balance? Do you say no? What do you do in this time of not only teaching, but doing all of your job, which is a number of responsibilities outside the classroom, and outside of student engagement?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that if there's any young faculty members out there, I should absolutely be the role model of what not to do with your academic career. Because my full time job is teaching, and then my other full time job is being chief technology officer, and then my other part time job is working on the Georgia Climate Project, and then my other part time job on top of that is administering the NPPA's Best of Photojournalism competition, and then I also teach at Pointer and some other places as well. So I I believed for a very long time that time was malleable, and it turns out it is not. That there is a finite amount of time, uh, and so I have actually really struggled with this. This is not something that I have done well this year. I have constantly
Mhm.
felt like I'm behind, much further than I usually feel that I'm behind. Um, and I think, you know, I'm glad that for my research faculty, my research colleagues here, UGA has been very open and said that they'll extend the tenure clock for anybody that is, tenure track. Um, they're not going to put as much emphasis on course evaluations because they know that all of our courses were pure chaos for 2020. So UGA has been remarkably progressive in the way they're setting expectations for faculty and staff here as well. Um, I think one of the things that's really important that maybe as journalism faculty we're not so good at talking about is how do we care for ourselves during all of this, because it's, we've spent a lot of time tonight already talking about how our students have handled this and how we tried to help the students and be there and be open and let them talk and and sort of work through all of their emotions. But for all of us that are on the other side of the podium, we're going through something that we've never gone through before as well. um, I think
True.
I think any of us that are on this session tonight, I know, Mikki, this is definitely true for you, and you've brought up comments from Rob and Martin, who I know both of them very well. We're all really passionate about being there for our students, and so we're going to do everything we can. We're going to work late. We're going to work weekends. We're going to answer emails when we get up at 5:30 in the morning to walk the dog. We're going to do whatever it takes to make sure the students have a good experience, because we know that what they're going through is hellish. But we're going through the same
Mhm.
thing. And I feel really lucky that both here at UGA, I've got colleagues that I trust and can lean on. And spread out across the country, I've got friends and colleagues at other institutions that are going through the same emotional load. We want this experience for our students that we cannot give them. And so we're all struggling to figure out how do we connect with them and not lose too much out of these conversations. And I think it's really important that we give ourselves a break. I know that I'm not doing my best teaching this semester. There's no question in my mind that there's more on the table that the students could get out of me. But at the end of the day, I've got to go home to a wife whose business has basically disappeared, to two kids who are 20 and 22, and they have no idea what's going on in the future for them, and two dogs who are very surprised that I'm home as much as I am these days. And all of those are different things that we have to kind of wrestle with. And so I think it's important for us to accept the fact that we can't do everything that we want to. That the grace we're extending to our students, we've got to extend to ourselves at times. So,
That is true. That's true. And that's
yeah,
that's good to hear because, I feel like I'm at that point of, okay, just one more week, and once one project ends, the next one has already started
right,
in my head and is never ending. And I've myself and I find a number of faculty members at Morehouse who are non-tenure track where nobody is saying this, but there's also this, back of our heads where it's, well, I have to say yes. I have to say yes. I'm on an annual contract. I need to make sure I'm valuable. So,
right,
this summer, I worked all summer and, we're 10-month employees.
mhm,
And it was just keep moving, keep moving. And no one said keep moving, but there's that feeling that I have to do this to make sure I can continue. But as you're trying to continue, you can get burnt out.
yeah,
So yeah, I know for me, I did the one small thing where I took my work email off of my phone, and so I have to go to my computer and set my time to actually see my work email.
yeah,
Um, and my 13-year-old set my phone where only program numbers ring my phone. And
mhm,
so there's just little things that I've done just to compartmentalize because I
mhm,
don't know how to say no. That's a
yeah.
challenge for me. And I think it is for many of you listening.
Can
Um,
I ask you this question?
so, yeah. Hmm.
Um, did you feel do you feel that desire to do more, to do more, to do more, to be equally split between wanting to make sure your students have the best experience and pressures from the institution? I know there's an awful lot of faculty members around the country that are very worried. If you read the Chronicle for Higher Education, it's almost every day they've got another story about colleges planning layoffs and budget cuts. And I'm not part of the
Mhm.
tenured faculty here, so if there are budget cuts, theoretically, my line could be on there. Um, what have you done to communicate with your department heads and dean to make sure that they understand the value that you bring to that program?
Well, we are a very small program of two faculty members, and so the head of the program, Ron Thomas, he is a sports writer. He covered Magic Johnson and Larry Bird when they were in college, and so his frame of reference for journalism is focused to what he knows well with his network, with what he's accomplished, and helps students in a number of ways. For me, he comes to me with anything related to today's digital media space. So I know when it comes to the journalism, what I know, what I teach, looking at innovation and bringing innovation to the classroom, I know I'm the only one on campus that does that. And so the concern isn't within our program. I just, there's this thing in the back of my mind that says if the CFO is making cuts, the CFO isn't looking at each individual faculty member and contributions. And, that's the stuff that's just in my head where decisions are made in a space that is not a space where neither Ron or I are privy to. So that has been very real because they've done furloughs, they've done cuts. We have no adjunct this year. And so we all have a 4-4 teaching load. Um, and so it's a lot, and cut in pay. I What I did was I became a certified Blackboard trainer, and so I'm able to work with faculty members who are not comfortable with online to help them with their courses, and now we're having to promote and constantly send updates of our accomplishments, student accomplishments, faculty accomplishments every month. So there's a lot now in my mind that takes me away from my own research and projects where it's just student centered and campus centered. And I've lost that time, or I have to wake up early or stay up later to work on my projects, which is what I find myself doing um, a lot. But that's where I find I get the boost of energy. You said something about balance and taking time out for ourselves. And a challenge I face is when I'm carving out time for myself, that means I'm actually doing more work. I'm doing the projects that I want to work on. I'm not necessarily taking a nap or going to a yoga class. So I have at least dedicated the hours of 5 to 6 a.m. for meditation, for workout, for my own time in the garage, and nobody can disturb me. So I know I have that hour. But after that hour ends, it's the juggle of family, online school, and then my own work. So it has been a lot. Has been a lot.
I had I got lucky that over the summer, every Saturday, I was able to go out in the morning and mow the lawn. And nobody bothers me when I'm mowing the lawn. It was about the only time that nobody would harass me because nobody in my family wants to come out and help do yard work. So I could go mow for 90 minutes and trim for another 30 to 45 minutes and then tighten the screws on the fence posts and anything like that just to stay outside and away from phones and computers and tablets and televisions. Just
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I started mowing the lawn slower and slower every single week. I think it's safer to say. So just
I can see
to
that.
find that moment.
I love
Yeah.
it.
No,
That's good.
yeah.
Um, so it's, the other thing that and you may know this, so I think that this can be helpful, but with limitation. If I think back to 2017, that's when we had hurricanes, two category 5 hurricanes, Irma and Maria were back to back. And they went through, a lot of us know, the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. And I have family in the Virgin Islands. I also have family on an island called Barbuda where Irma hit and destroyed every building and almost every house on the island. And I had this survivor's remorse. And I started, shipping food and supplies to family members. And I was like, this is not making me feel better. Doing fundraisers, it's not making me feel better. But what I stopped and I thought about where are my skills and what do I know how to do well? And that's storytelling. And I can pick up a camera and tell a story. And so for me, I went to St. Thomas, I went to Barbuda, and I started documenting. And it was helpful for the people I was documenting, but it was also this experience for me that helped me feel like I had control of something. And that's something, I'm comfortable with. So not that I have the time, but in this 2020 year, I've done a lot more coverage, and it's coverage for my own projects, for my own self that I can then write an article about. But I've shifted to doing more stories of going out and covering protests, interviewing students about their stories. And that's helped me, but it's also helped them to be able to express themselves and share their stories. So, for those of us that don't know how to say no, sometimes if we tap into the gifts we have and what we do really well, we can carve out that time to mow the lawn. But if we don't have a lawn, like I don't have a lawn, we can pick up that camera and actually pour some love into what we know how to do well, and feel that control. Um, so I do want to share a clip. It's a 5-minute clip of a student, and this is the student that shifted everything for me. It was I was talking to a student one who was driving from Atlanta to Virginia every week in March, and we would talk about her work. And in one of the weeks, she shared with me that she was going to Virginia to take her mother to her chemo appointments, but her job was in Atlanta, so she couldn't do school from Virginia. And when she shared that with me, I just stayed positive and spoke to her, and you know, just encouraged her to keep going and doing what she needed to do. But when I hung up that phone, I was drained, and I realized I'm not a therapist. And the phone calls came in with students, and I was just taxed. I didn't know what to do. And so in April, I received a phone call from a Morehouse student who was not in my class but knows me, and he said, "I've lost 5 members of my family to COVID in the past week. I'm in the Bronx. I don't know if tomorrow's going to come. I don't know what to do. I'm worried." And so he was very upset, but I was in this state of I I I don't have anything to offer. I did nothing. I didn't know what to say. And that was when I wish I had a psychologist next to me to just like whisper in my ear, but I didn't. And so I went back to that, where are my skills? And I can interview and I can ask questions. And so I said to the student, can do you want me to record? Do you want to tell your story? And I can record it. And it can be helpful if we share it with faculty members to know what students are going through. Because a lot of us are so focused on Blackboard and online teaching and assignments, we're not in touch to know exactly what you're going through. And so we did that. And that was something that helped him, but it also helped me. And it also helped our faculty know what students are experiencing. So I do want, if you don't mind, I want to play that. It's about 5 minutes, but I do want to play Julian speaking, and this was a point where he just said, "I need something, and I don't know what it is, but I need some motivation." And so that was what this interview did. And we recorded for over an hour. Um, and it ends on a very positive note, but I did want to just take the slice where he's talking about his circumstances and what he was experiencing for you to hear. Hours. What I'd like to do is start off with you just introducing yourself. So, who are you? Who are we talking to here?
I'm a first generation college student and American. My mother is from Honduras, my dad's from Jamaica. But in my typical Morehouse intro, my name is Julian Hemmings. I'm a senior English major from the Bronx.
So, tell me what your days are like. What's going on? Assuming I don't know that there's a pandemic, tell me what's going on right now in your life.
Well, I think the pandemic has defined my existence here more than any moment in my existence. But I think whenever America sneezes, the Bronx has a really, really bad flu. So my father's not at home right now. He's off to work in Manhattan. because he's an essential worker as a security guard. My mom is at home because her job has shut down temporarily. And but my mom is okay. Everybody's okay in the house. But I can't say that my days are not covered with anxiety for my father, are not covered with anxiety for my family members. I've lost many due to COVID-19. Members that I was close to, I've lost them in a matter of weeks. The world that I once knew, the Bronx, New York being so busy, the city that never sleeps, feels like it's in a coma. The days seem faster because we're not going outside. It's dreary, but what I found myself doing in the moments like this is not accepting the world just as it is, recognizing it as it is, but trying my best to make a difference in it.
What is it you would want people to know about the student experience? If you had to shed light to faculty members, to administrators, to the public when they say, "Oh, how's it going?" What would you want them to know?
Some of us don't have the privileges to have a functioning laptop. Some of us are homeless. Some of us are are dealing with depression. Some of us are dealing with or will be dealing with PTSD after this. Some of us don't know what tomorrow may look like for our parents. Some of us are losing our loved ones. Some of us, but all of us are feeling this pain. And I hope that everyone can have a sense of empathy for those young people who are having to do all this work, pay all of these loans, in spite of losing this time in their lives at this moment. So it's painful.
You mentioned losing family members. When you are dealing with the loss of someone you know, this when this hits local, when this hits at home, how do you deal with that? What does that mean
I
for
don't
the
know.
next
I
day?
don't know. I don't know how I deal with it. Honest, I don't know. All I know is that I'm working and I'm helping people and I'm using their memories to motivate me. But there are moments where I deal with it worse than other days. I don't know how I deal with it, to be honest with you. I've been trying to figure that one out. I've been writing, I've been contemplating, I've been angry, I've been appreciative of their lives. I don't know if I'll ever get over it. All I know is that my compassion has grown. My love and appreciation for my own family that are alive now has expanded. But have I dealt with it? No.
You said your dad is an essential worker. Have you had conversations with him about what his day is like?
Yeah, I mean, people at his job have passed away. People in the building that he secures. Like I believe it's been. I might. I don't know. I think the number last time he told me it was 10. I worry for him. He worries for himself. I worry for my mother that he can bring something back to the house. But you can't be a security guard from the comfort of your own home. And we got to make rent. This is. I mean, like I'm. This is real life. I think for me, what I can do is I can just go to law school, and this no longer becomes my existence. And in a strange way, I think I appreciate coming back home because I get it allows me to be more empathetic because it doesn't take me away from my community. We're humble, working class people. So his day is not good. I mean, when he's driving past NYU and they're the trailers and just for body bags, I think his days he expresses a nervousness, but it may be more fearful than he might be more fearful than he's letting off. I would be.
Yeah. So that was a portion of Julian sharing. And what that did, he talked about empathy, but it did make me think about what was most valuable and being able to have this situational awareness of what students were going through and not think so much about, the logistics of everything, but really at this point in time in our lives, what's most valuable. So they still are learning, but they have people like us who they can call. And then how do we respond in a way that doesn't have us just crying every night and taxed. And so for me, that was, how do I become that journalist and start recording and documenting some of these stories? And for Julian, what was really good was we went from this conversation to Ahmaud Arbery to post George Floyd's killings, and he became a central figure in protesting. He actually became a delegate for the DNC, and expressed his support for Bernie Sanders, and was like, I'll support Joe Biden, but Bernie's my man, but I don't have the privilege of not voting for Biden. So we're going to do this and have a movement. And so he started orchestrating student movements with voting. And so he's done a significant amount as it relates to voting, but we keep having these conversations, and it's helped him, but it's also helped me. And so that's something that I know a lot of us can do, our own aspect of storytelling. If we do want to tap into making sure we stay active with our research and projects, it may also be looking at how can we be supportive to students, but also start documenting these stories, because no one else is going to cover them, because they feel so comfortable with us and we have that access. So how do we do that in a respectful way as we juggle everything? So a question came in
Our
into
students.
the queue. What'd you say?
I was just going to say we spend so much time in our classes talking about giving voice to the voiceless, and what I
Hmm.
love in that piece is that you gave voice to somebody who may have felt that they were voiceless. And so while it's important to document the experience that our students are having, what was probably more important there is that you were willing to listen. That by asking him if you could record that conversation, you were honoring who he is and what his experience is, and saying, look, your experience is important. It's important that other people understand what you're going through, and that validation, that may have been worth more than anything else to him, in the spring when you had that conversation. I don't think we can ever underestimate how important it is to help a student feel that there's somebody who's willing to listen to them. I
Hmm.
just That's so critical for these kids right now. I mean, I see that every time I walk into the classroom, every time I log on to Zoom, and I see faces staring back at me before they click off their cameras. They're desperate to be heard again. So,
That is so true. That is so true.
yeah.
And
Thank
and
you for
I've
sharing.
actually, oh, thank you. I actually, I have some alum that I'm in touch with that I just have asked them to be available to students also, to, and you mentioned alum giving feedback and mentoring. I think that's another thing that's really good to tap into. Alum want to be involved and give in some ways. They don't have to just donate money, they can donate time. And that's been helpful for me when I felt overwhelmed with not having, a lot of students, when they see you're on Instagram, for me, they then want to send a DM and then want to call. And that may be 10 o'clock at night. So, I had to start going through my list of alum that I could say, okay, you're in law. Could you talk to Julian? Can you be somebody that he can talk to about law school? So as I'm trying to line up students who have certain career interests or location, the Bronx is home for Julian, but also home for a number of people that are in my network. My family's from the Bronx as well. So it tapping into alum has been helpful in this time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Mark, I was going to ask you about this summer with protests. Did you have students at all, studying or working over the summer or reaching out with questions about protests and covering protests?
I did. So I wasn't teaching over the summer, but the independent student publication here, the Red and Black, published throughout the summer, all online this year. They usually do weekly print editions, but they weren't doing print editions. And I had two or three of my kids that were here all summer long, and Athens had a couple of vigils and had some protests, and there was an evening where the Athens Clarke County Police decided to break up the remaining crowd by launching tear gas at them. Um, and I started getting questions from my students, sort of random emails and phone calls when the protests in Minneapolis and elsewhere started popping up. So I wrote a blog post that said these are the things, sort of these are the things you need to watch out for, because it wasn't something that we had talked about in any classes. And then the students, I had two or three of them that were covering these things pretty consistently here in town. I tried to check in with them and make sure that they were doing okay, and ask them what their experiences were. What did you learn from that? So that they once again had a place that they could feel comfortable talking about what they had experienced, what they had seen, what they had heard, ask questions about, I heard this happen, I saw that, how do I react, what do I cover, what don't I include? So, everything is sort of that teachable moment at this point in time. Um, Thankfully Athens, like I said, we had about a week where there were protests downtown, and then uh, there was a Confederate War Memorial in the middle of the downtown area, which the city council or the county commissioners finally figured out how to remove. So there was another round of protests and celebrations around the memorial coming down, which they took down at about 9:30 or 10 o'clock on a Monday night, um, hoping that nobody would notice, I think. But my kids were out there and they made some great images. So yeah.
I saw a really good photo, and I wish I remembered who took it. It was, where there were a group of protesters on the right side of the image, and on the left were graduates in cap and gowns,
Yeah, that's
posing in front of the.
yeah.
Who's? Do you know who
Yeah.
took that?
Yeah, Krishna Sharma
Or-
is the student who took that. Krishna is not a
Okay,
journalism student. Krishna is
really?
a graduate student in the ecology department. And last
Okay.
fall, he reached out to me and said that he was interested in taking my documentary photojournalism class, which has prerequisites in the journalism department. And I was like, I don't know who you are, and I'm not sure that this is a good idea. And I will fully admit that I did everything I could to try and talk him out of taking the class. And he kept pushing, and I said, well, what's your experience? And he sent me his website, and he had all the technical skills that he needed. And so we had 18 undergrads and Krishna in that class, and boy, he took to that class like a fish to water. I mean, he just completely immersed himself. He had reached out to me in December and said, what do I need to know about this? And I gave him a couple of books that I thought he should read. He read every single one of them. He came in, he was better prepared than all the other photojournalism students were. He just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. He did a great project about isolating with his significant other in the spring semester, and he went downtown to make that image, which ended up getting picked up on a couple of national websites and discussed quite widely. And he wrote a great piece about it because he's not active on social media. He shared it with a friend who posted it on Instagram, and it took off, and his friend was freaked out and took it down. And then Krishna went and put it back up because, as you said, on one side of the frame, you have a group of Black Lives Matters protesters in front of this Confederate War Memorial. And on the other side, there's a group of sorority women who are doing their graduation photos in front of the arch, this ceremonial entrance to the university. And the split between the two of them, there's multiple ways of interpreting this. One is that the women are just completely tone deaf to what's going on. And Krishna was smart enough to realize that that's one way to look at it. But the other way to look at it is those are women who had spent 4 years working really, really hard to complete their degrees. And they should have a right to be able to be happy about that. But it really brought together sort of this dichotomy of all of the different emotions, and things are not as easy to, it's not an easy picture to read. You want to read it and
Mhm.
say the protesters are doing something that's good for society, and these women over here, they're just celebrating. Well, those women are going to go on and they're going to work jobs that are going to change their communities. And Krishna wrote a really elegant essay that was published in the local paper about it. I mean, uh, he called me about it over the summer after he'd made it and said it's blowing up and I don't know what to do about it. And I'm like, you get as many people to see it as you possibly can, because it's an important
Yeah.
image. It's going to spark conversations, which is what good journalism should do. It should educate us about what's happening. It should illuminate what's going on and give us context, and it should resonate. It should stick with people. And that image did all of that. And I continue to hear from him every couple of weeks, and I keep hoping that he's going to change his major and come over and be a journalist, because boy, do we need his voice. I love that
Yeah,
guy so much. I would do anything to get him in another class, anything at all. So
that is great. Wow. Well, and there were a lot of conversations, but it was also the masks versus non-masks.
yeah,
That was the first discussion was why aren't they wearing masks and the other people wearing
yeah.
masks. But there were a lot of layers to that photo.
That's a student who I think before you can be a great journalist, you have to be a good human. And Krishna, as with so many of my kids, I'm just incredibly lucky that I get these great kids that come in and they care. They care about people and they care about community. And if you can get somebody to care, you can get them to do almost anything. And that's paraphrasing my good friend Dave LaBelle. Uh, but Dave taught me years ago that the most important thing for me to get across to the students is to get them to care. If they care about the people they're photographing, those stories will resonate. And Krishna cares about people.
Hmm.
That's it's and that shows in that photograph. It's such a simple photograph,
Hmm.
and it's so powerful at the same time. So,
That's great.
can I ask you one last question?
I must have known. Yeah, I was going to say I knew he was connected to you in some way. So that's great to hear the
So
backstory with that.
it's such a tangential connection. It's comical. I mean, I suspect he would have made that picture without ever having sat in my class, but I just never would have known about it.
Yeah.
So what do you think has been your biggest success with your students since all of this started back in March? I mean, if you look back over the last 7 8 months, what can you point to something and say that's a place that what you did mattered?
Yeah, I would say that, as I said, like this big shift where I look at what do I value, what's most important. Um, in end of May, when the protests first started happening, a number of students reached out to me to say, I'm going out. What do I need to do? What do I need to have? And, in those first conversations, it was the logistics, make sure you have a lawyer's phone number written on your arm with a Sharpie, make sure you have water, you're protecting yourself, the rules of covering a protest. And, and then the question that came in was, well, one of my students said, I'm going to protest, but I'm going to have my camera with me. And another student said, oh, I have to document, but I have to be a part of this. And I didn't say this, but my initial reaction in my head was, you can't be a journalist and be a part of a protest. And a number of these students are film studies students, creatives. They're not journalists. But what I learned from them, I was in middle school and high school when South Africa protests against apartheid were taking place. When I was in high school, the Rodney King killing and then riots that resulted were taking place in Atlanta. So a number of my friends who were in college at the time were tear gassed by police, were, on campus where they were seen as people that were doing all the harm. And so there are stories of that, but I've never lived through that. We protested misogyny in rap music when I was in college, but it was in on campus, nothing major. And so what I realized was this point in time is one that I can't dictate or orchestrate the role that a student plays when they go out there. I can give them the tools that I know with being safe, but I actually step back and let them run with what they wanted to do. And what I saw result, one of my students, his pictures got picked up on the New York Times. I was so proud of him. Another one, I introduced him to virtual reality, and next thing you know, he's got everything in 360 that he's recorded. And what I saw was the role that they took as protesters gave them the upfront inside access, that they were able to share stories, and feel as if they were a part, because they said they couldn't be there without being a part of it. And the work that they've done has just been tremendous, and it's made me proud. And it's also allowed me to look at, I'm not your photo editor. you're not on assignment, you're just going out and covering this. Why not go and cover and protest and do what you want to do in these spaces where you don't have an editor saying, what else do you have? That's what I have in my mind when I go out to cover, but that doesn't mean they have to have that in their head, not at this point in time. So what I think a big win was, as we reflect and have these conversations now this semester about everything, it's looking at the responsibility. They see responsibility, they feel it, they are connected to what's taking place today, and they feel like they are helping share voices in ways that other people may not be able to. And the learning lesson of what we do as journalists, they've learned in this summer of protests that they couldn't learn in a classroom. And they could have, but they've learned it so much better by experiencing the work that they've done. That's been a huge win that I see.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're in our final minute, and I have questions that are in the queue. Um, One that did come up was about sharing syllabi. And Mark, I don't know if you want to mention your website, but if people want to see syllabi or work, where can they go?
Um, so my website is woefully out of date at the moment. If you go to visualjournalism.info, there's a tab across the top for classes, and you'll probably be able to see some old syllabi. None of the current ones are up there. One of the decisions I made over the summer was that I was going to simplify the platforms that my students need to pay attention to. And I'm really glad that I did, because one of the biggest complaints that I'm hearing from my kids is some of us are completely in the learning management system, and some have added Slack channels and Trello channels and text chats and GroupMe and all of these different platforms. And the students are really struggling to try and stay on top of things. So if I can offer one quick piece of advice to everybody as you're planning your spring semester, simplify. Whatever your university's learning management system is, no matter how much you hate it, and trust me, I hate ours, just use it. Make your kids' lives easier. You want to be teaching them journalism and problem solving in journalism, not problem solving and trying to figure out where an assignment is due. But if there's somebody out there who's interested in seeing my where I started the semester at the very least, I'm more than happy to share those syllabi with them. Just drop me an email. I'm easy to find on the college's website. So.
Thank you. And Mark, you're here today. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and if anybody's got good ideas on how to teach a documentary photojournalism class in the spring when we're still not allowed to let students be near people for more than 10 minutes at a time, I'm all ears on that one, because I'm starting to scratch my head an awful lot about how to do that class. So.
Well, I was going to say, you're here tonight because of what you shared. I know with me, when I went to my first Teachapalooza at Poynter Institute, in that you were seen as a resource. I've seen you as a resource, and your site, but also these learning lessons, I think, are valuable. And for all of us here, there is this network that we can tap into with each other. And hopefully we'll be seeing you at the seminar in 2021. But throughout this year, know that we're here and you're not alone. And as we all shift and adjust our priorities, it's important, of course, we think about the students, we think about our colleagues, we also think about our own health and what we're doing. So I really appreciate you, Mark. I appreciate everyone who's joined us. And any questions that were not answered, what we'll do, if you can just make sure, if you asked a question that was not answered, you also send us your affiliation or your email, and we can get back to you with some of those responses to those questions. But thank you, and everyone, enjoy this semester, the rest of the semester, and good luck. Also with this week and the conference, enjoy the sessions, and I look forward to meeting some of you and talking to you. Mark, thank you.
Thanks for putting this together, Mikki. This has been awesome.
Thanks so much.
All right.